Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, October 24th, 1942. The jungle was trying to kill them. Private First Class Michael Chen had learned this truth within his first week on Guadalcanal. It wasn't just the Japanese soldiers who wanted them dead, though there were plenty of those. It was the jungle itself, the oppressive heat that turned uniforms into sweat-soaked rags within minutes, the mosquitoes that carried malaria and dengue fever, the leeches that attached themselves to every exposed bit of skin, the dysentery that weakened men faster than enemy bullets, the mud that sucked at boots and made every step exhausting, and the sounds. God, the sounds. The jungle never stopped screaming. Birds that sounded like dying men, insects that buzzed and clicked and whirred, the constant drip of moisture from the canopy above. And underneath it all, the knowledge that Japanese soldiers were out there, invisible in the green hell, waiting. Michael was 23 years old, a second-generation Chinese-American from San Francisco's Chinatown. His parents had immigrated from Guangdong province, opened a small grocery store, raised 3 kids in a cramped apartment above the shop. Michael had been studying engineering at UC Berkeley when Pearl Harbor happened. He'd enlisted the next day, wanting to prove his loyalty, wanting to fight the Japanese who were brutalizing China. Now he was with the 2nd Raider Battalion, the elite Carlson's Raiders, fighting in one of the most brutal campaigns of the Pacific War. The battle for Guadalcanal had been raging for nearly 3 months. The Japanese refused to give up the island. Neither would the Americans. Men were dying by the hundreds in the jungle, on the beaches, in desperate night attacks and savage close-quarters combat. Today, Michael's patrol was moving through dense jungle south of Henderson Field, the critical airstrip both sides were fighting to control. 8 Rangers, moving in single file, weapons ready, every nerve stretched tight. Their mission was reconnaissance, locate Japanese positions, estimate strength, get back alive. Lieutenant Frank Morrison led the patrol. He was a tough Texan, 25 years old, already a veteran of multiple actions. Behind him came Sergeant Bill O'Connor, an Irish kid from Boston. Then Michael, then 5 other Rangers whose names had become as familiar as family. Tommy Walker from Georgia, Jose Martinez from New Mexico, Sam Cohen from Brooklyn, James Doc Williams, who served as their medic, and bringing up the rear, Corporal Robert Hayes from Montana. They'd been moving for 3 hours, penetrating deep into Japanese-controlled territory. The tension was suffocating. Every shadow could hide an enemy soldier. Every sound could be the prelude to an ambush. They found the Japanese position by accident. Morrison raised his fist, the signal to halt. Everyone froze. Through the dense vegetation ahead, Michael could see movement. Then he saw them clearly. Japanese soldiers, maybe 20 of them, setting up a defensive position. Machine gun nests, foxholes. They were digging in, preparing for an attack. Morrison hand-signaled. Pull back, slowly, no noise. The patrol began backing away, moving with agonizing care. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. Then Tommy Walker stepped on a fallen branch. The crack echoed like a gunshot in the humid air. Everything exploded. The Japanese opened fire immediately. Rifles cracked. A Nambu machine gun chattered to life. Bullets tore through the foliage, snapping branches, thudding into trees. "Contact! Fall back!" Morrison shouted. The patrol scattered, returning fire, moving through the jungle in organized chaos. Michael fired his M1 Garand, the rifle kicking against his shoulder, empty clips pinging away as he reloaded on the move. The jungle erupted with gunfire and shouts, English and Japanese mixing in a cacophony of violence. They ran for maybe 300 yards, the Japanese pursuing, before Morrison found a defensible position, a small ridge with good cover and clear fields of fire. "Set up here, defensive positions." The Rangers deployed, weapons aimed back the way they'd come. The Japanese attack came 30 seconds later, a probing assault, testing their strength. The Americans drove them back with concentrated fire. For the next 2 hours, they held that ridge. The Japanese attacked twice more, each time being repulsed. But ammunition was running low. Doc Williams had already treated 3 wounded. O'Connor had taken a bullet through his arm. Martinez had shrapnel in his leg, and Cohen had been grazed across the ribs. As dusk approached, the Japanese pulled back. Morrison made the call to withdraw under cover of darkness, get back to American lines before they were completely surrounded. They moved through the darkening jungle, helping the wounded, every man exhausted and running on adrenaline. They were maybe a mile from safety when they came across the scene, a small clearing, signs of a recent violent encounter. Shell casings everywhere, blood on the vegetation, and bodies. 4 Japanese soldiers killed in what looked like an artillery strike or maybe a mortar attack. They'd been dead for hours, maybe a day. "Keep moving," Morrison ordered. "Don't stop." But Michael did stop, because one of the Japanese soldiers, a young man, couldn't have been more than 20, had something clutched in his hand. A small notebook, bound in leather, pages yellowed. Michael didn't know why he did it. Maybe because the dead soldier looked so young. Maybe because something in the way the man's fingers were wrapped around that notebook suggested it had been important to him. Maybe because Michael had kept his own journal before the fighting got too intense. He reached down and gently pried the notebook from the dead man's fingers. "Chen, what the hell are you doing?" O'Connor hissed. "Leave it. We gotta move." "Just a second." Michael tucked the notebook into his jacket. He didn't examine it then. There was no time. The patrol moved on, eventually making it back to American lines as full darkness fell. That night, in the relative safety of their camp, while others slept or stood watch, Michael pulled out the notebook. He opened it carefully, expecting, what? Military intelligence? Tactical information? What he found was something else entirely. A diary. A personal diary, written in Japanese. Michael's mother had taught him to read Chinese characters, and while Japanese used a different writing system, there was enough overlap that he could make out some of it. Not everything. His Japanese was limited, but enough. Enough to realize this wasn't a soldier's tactical notes. This was a man's soul, written on paper. The first entry he could partially decipher was dated July 1942. "My dearest Keiko, I write to you though you will never read these words. I carry your photograph always, and our daughters. Little Yumi must be nearly 3 now. Does she remember her father? I pray she does, though I fear I will become nothing more than a photograph to her, a stranger in uniform who left when she was too young to form memories." Michael's hands trembled. He knew he should report this to intelligence. Diaries could contain useful information, but something stopped him. He kept reading, struggling through the characters he could recognize, piecing together fragments. August 1942. The American bombings continue. We dig deeper into the jungle, but there is no escape from their planes. Tanaka was killed yesterday. A good man, a teacher before the war. He spoke often of his students. Now he will never see them again. I wonder what Yumi is learning in school. Is she learning to write? I taught her the first stroke of her name before I left. Does she remember? September 1942. Starvation is our constant companion now. The supply ships cannot get through. We eat roots, insects, anything we can find. Men are dying not from American bullets, but from hunger and disease. Is this glory? Is this honor? Or have we been sent to die in this green hell for reasons we no longer understand? Keiko, if I do not return, please tell Yumi that her father loved her. Tell her I thought of her every day. Tell her that in my final moments, her face was before me, smiling as she did that last morning when I left for the train station. Michael had to stop reading. His hands were shaking too badly. This Japanese soldier, this enemy, had a wife, a daughter. He wrote poetry about the jungle flowers. He described the stars over Guadalcanal and wondered if his wife was seeing the same stars back in Japan. He wrote about fear, about homesickness, about wanting the war to end so he could go home. He was exactly like Michael, exactly like every American soldier on this island who carried photographs of sweethearts and wrote letters home and just wanted to survive to see their families again. Over the following weeks, Michael read the diary in stolen moments. He didn't tell anyone about it. It felt too private, too sacred, using a combination of his limited Japanese, Chinese character recognition and a Japanese-English dictionary he'd borrowed from the intelligence section, claiming he wanted to learn to read captured documents. He slowly translated more entries. The soldier's name had been Hiroshi Yamamoto. He'd been a schoolteacher in Osaka before the war, specializing in literature and poetry. He'd been drafted in 1941, sent to China first, then to the Pacific. The diary spanned from his departure from Japan to his final entry, written the morning of the day Michael had found him. That final entry destroyed Michael. October 23rd, 1942. I believe this may be my last sunrise. The Americans are advancing. We have orders to hold this position to the death. There will be no retreat, no surrender. The Emperor commands, and we obey. But I confess, and may the Kami forgive me, I do not want to die for the Emperor. I want to die for nothing at all. I want to live. I want to see Yumi grow up. I want to hold Keiko again. I want to teach school again. To see young minds discover the beauty of poetry. If these are my final words, then let them be this. War is a lie. Honor is a lie. Glory is a lie. There is only death, and the waste of it breaks my heart. Keiko, my love, my eternal love, forgive me for leaving you. Yumi, my sweet daughter, grow strong, grow kind, grow wise. Do not let them teach you to hate. Do not let them teach you that killing is noble. The sun is rising. It is a beautiful sunrise. I wish I could show it to you both. The entry ended there. Hours later, Hiroshi Yamamoto had been killed by American artillery, along with 3 of his comrades. He died clutching this diary, these final words to a family he'd never see again. Michael wept that night, quietly, so his fellow Rangers wouldn't hear. He wept for Hiroshi Yamamoto, enemy and fellow human. He wept for Keiko and Yumi, waiting in Japan for a husband and father who'd never come home. He wept for the terrible waste of it all. He knew he should turn in the diary. It was enemy property. It might contain intelligence value, but he couldn't. It felt like a betrayal, like desecrating something sacred. So he kept it, hid it in his pack, and he kept fighting, because that's what soldiers did. But something had changed in Michael. Every Japanese soldier he saw through his rifle sights now had a face, had a story, had a family waiting for him. The battle for Guadalcanal raged on. Michael fought in the final Japanese offensive in late October. He was there when the Japanese finally withdrew in February 1943. He survived Guadalcanal, then fought in the campaigns that followed, New Georgia, Bougainville, others whose names blurred together in a haze of jungle, heat, and violence. He was wounded twice, awarded the Bronze Star for valor, made it all the way to Japan in 1945, was part of the occupation force after the atomic bombs fell and the empire surrendered. And through it all, he carried Hiroshi Yamamoto's diary. In Japan in 1945, Michael walked the streets of Osaka, the city where Hiroshi had lived and taught. He thought about trying to find the address, it was written in the diary, to deliver it to Hiroshi's widow. But what would he say? I'm the American soldier who found your husband's body. How could that help anyone? So he didn't. He went home to San Francisco in 1946, the diary still in his possession. He went back to Berkeley, finished his engineering degree, got a job with an aeronautics company, married a nice girl named Ruth, a nurse from the hospital where he'd been treated after coming home, had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. He built a good life, a normal life, but he never forgot Hiroshi Yamamoto, and he never stopped carrying the guilt of having that diary, those final words meant for a wife and daughter, keeping them from the people they were written for. Michael told Ruth about the diary in 1950, 5 years after the war ended. She'd found him one night in his study, holding the worn notebook, tears running down his face. What is that? She asked gently. So he told her everything, about finding Hiroshi's body, about reading the diary, about learning that his enemy was just a man who wanted to go home to his family, about carrying the secret for 8 years. Ruth sat beside him, held his hand. You need to return it, Michael. You need to find his family and give them his words. How? I don't even know if they're alive. The bombings, the atomic bombs. Osaka was devastated. They could be dead. And even if they're alive, how do I find them? How do I face them? You'll find a way. Because you're carrying this weight, and it's crushing you. You need to let it go. And they need to have his words. But Michael didn't. The years passed. His children grew. His career advanced. He tried to forget about the diary, kept it locked in a desk drawer. But it haunted him. In his dreams, he saw Hiroshi's face, heard his voice reading those final words. In 1975, Michael's eldest son, Thomas, found the diary while helping his father move to a new house. Dad, what's this? Is this Japanese? Michael had to sit down. His son was 30 years old now, a lawyer with his own family, and he was holding the diary that had haunted Michael for 33 years. It's a long story, son. I've got time. So Michael told him the whole story, for the second time in his life. And Thomas said the same thing Ruth had said 25 years earlier. Dad, you need to return it. This family deserves to have their father's final words. It's been too long. 33 years. They've moved on. They've built new lives. Me showing up would just reopen old wounds, or it would bring them closure. Dad, you've carried this for 33 years. Don't you think they've been carrying something too? The pain of not knowing what happened to him. The pain of never getting to say goodbye. Michael knew his son was right, but the guilt and fear were paralyzing. What if they hated him? What if seeing the diary made their pain worse? What if they blamed him for their husband and father's death? More years passed. Michael retired. His children had children of their own. Ruth developed cancer and fought it bravely for 2 years before passing away in 1998. At her funeral, Michael stood over her casket and made a promise. "I'll do it, Ruth. I'll return the diary. I should have done it 50 years ago, but I'll do it now. I promise." Michael was 79 years old. He'd survived a world war, built a career, raised a family. He'd lived a full life, but he'd never found peace about Hiroshi Yamamoto's diary. In 1999, with the help of his son Thomas, who spoke some Japanese from his years working with Japanese tech companies, Michael began the search. It wasn't easy. Post-war records were incomplete. Many families had moved or been killed in the bombings. But Thomas was persistent, hiring researchers in Japan, contacting veterans organizations, following every lead. It took 3 years. 3 years of dead ends and false hopes. But finally, in 2002, they found her. Keiko Yamamoto, still alive, still living in Osaka, in the same neighborhood where she and Hiroshi had lived before the war. She was 84 years old, a widow who had never remarried, who had raised her daughter alone, who had spent 60 years not knowing exactly how or where her husband had died. Thomas arranged everything. The flights, the translator, the meeting. Michael was 83 now, his body frail, but his mind still sharp. The guilt and fear he'd carried for 60 years were finally about to be resolved, one way or another. They flew to Osaka in April 2002. The city had been rebuilt from its wartime destruction, transformed into a modern metropolis. But the neighborhood where Keiko lived retained some of its old character. Traditional houses mixed with newer buildings, narrow streets, small gardens. Thomas knocked on the door of a small, neat house with a well-tended garden. An elderly woman answered. She was small, white-haired, with Hiroshi's gentle eyes. Beside her stood another woman, perhaps in her early 60s. Yumi, the daughter Hiroshi had written about. The translator explained who they were and why they'd come. Keiko's hand flew to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. "Hiroshi? You have—" Hiroshi's words. They sat in Keiko's small living room, drinking tea that Yumi prepared with shaking hands. Michael held the diary, this object he'd carried for 60 years, and tried to find words in English that the translator could convey in Japanese. "I was a soldier on Guadalcanal in 1942, he began. "I found your husband after a battle. He had died, and I am so sorry for your loss. He was holding this diary. I took it. I shouldn't have. I should have turned it in to my commanders or left it with him. But I took it, and I read it, and I learned who he was." The translator conveyed this. Keiko listened, tears streaming down her weathered face. "For 60 years, Michael continued, I have carried this diary and the guilt of having it. Your husband's final words were meant for you, and I kept them from you. I cannot apologize enough. I can only return what should have been yours all along." He held out the diary with trembling hands. Keiko took it, held it to her chest, and wept. Great heaving sobs that shook her small frame. Yumi embraced her mother, crying as well. After several minutes, Keiko composed herself enough to speak. "You read it?" she asked through the translator. "Yes, I'm sorry. I know it was private, but I read it, and I learned that your husband was a good man, a teacher, a poet, a loving husband and father. He wrote about missing you and Yumi every day. His final entry." Michael's voice broke. He couldn't continue. Keiko opened the diary with reverent care. The pages were yellowed and worn, but the writing was still clear. She found the final entry, the one dated October 23, 1942. She read it silently, her lips moving with the words. More tears fell, spotting the old paper. "I never knew," she whispered. "For 60 years I never knew how he died, where he died, what his final thoughts were. The military told me only that he had died heroically for the emperor. Nothing more. No details, no closure." She looked up at Michael, and in her eyes was not hate, but gratitude. "You have given me the greatest gift. You have given me my husband's final words. You have let me know that in his last moments he thought of us, that he loved us, that he wanted to come home." "I should have brought it sooner," Michael said. 60 years. "I'm so sorry it took so long." Keiko shook her head. You brought it now. That is what matters. You carried my husband's words across a war, across an ocean, across 60 years. You kept them safe. You brought them home to me. How can I be anything but grateful? Yumi spoke for the first time, her voice thick with emotion. I was 3 years old when my father left. I have only one memory of him. He was teaching me to write my name. I remember his hand guiding mine, forming the characters. That is all I have of him. Now, because of you, I have his words. I can read his thoughts. I can know who he was. The four of them sat together for hours. Keiko read passages from the diary aloud, passages about Yumi as a baby, about their marriage, about ordinary days that had seemed unremarkable at the time, but became precious in memory. She read Hiroshi's descriptions of Guadalcanal, the terrible beauty of the jungle, the fear, the homesickness. She read his doubts about the war, his growing conviction that it was all a waste, all a tragedy. He was right, Keiko said. It was a waste, a terrible waste. All those young men, Japanese and American, dying in that jungle for nothing, and the families left behind, carrying grief for the rest of their lives. Michael told them about his war, about the fear and the violence, about reading Hiroshi's diary and realizing that his enemy was a human being just like him, about carrying the guilt for 60 years. I killed Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal, he said. I had to. It was war. But after reading your husband's diary, everyone I killed had a face, had a story. I saw Hiroshi in all of them, and it broke something in me, made me understand the true cost of war. As the afternoon wore on, something remarkable happened. The old wounds began to heal. The hatred and division of war began to dissolve. Here, in this small living room in Osaka, were two families bound together by tragedy, finding connection and healing 60 years late. Before Michael left, Keiko insisted on showing him photographs. Hiroshi in his teacher's uniform, young and smiling. Hiroshi and Keiko on their wedding day. Hiroshi holding baby Yumi, his face radiant with pride and joy. This is who he was, Keiko said. Not a soldier, not an enemy, a teacher, a husband, a father. Thank you for seeing him that way. Thank you for treating his words with respect. She gave Michael a photograph to keep. Hiroshi, Keiko, and Yumi, taken in 1940, before the war changed everything. A family, intact and happy, preserved forever in black and white. So you remember, Keiko said. So you remember the man whose words you carried all these years. Michael and Thomas stayed in Osaka for 3 days. They visited Hiroshi's school, which had been rebuilt after the war. They placed flowers at a memorial for teachers who had died in the war. They walked the streets of the neighborhood where Hiroshi had lived and taught. On their final day, Yumi, now a grandmother herself, invited them to her home for dinner. Her children and grandchildren were there, 3 generations of Yamamoto descendants who existed because Hiroshi and Keiko had found love before war tore them apart. Yumi stood and raised her glass in a toast. To my father, Hiroshi Yamamoto, who I never got to know but whose words I can now read. And to Michael Chen, who carried those words across 6 decades and an ocean to bring them home. May we never forget the cost of war, and may we never stop choosing peace. Everyone drank, and Michael, for the first time in 60 years, felt the weight he'd been carrying finally lift. He died 3 years later in 2005, at the age of 86. At his funeral, his son Thomas told the story of the diary and the 60-year journey to return it. And sitting in the front row, having traveled from Japan to honor the man who'd returned her father's words, was Yumi Yamamoto. She spoke at the funeral, her English hesitant but clear. Michael Chen taught me that our enemies are human, that war creates divisions, but humanity can bridge them. He carried my father's words when he could have destroyed them. He read them when he could have ignored them. He returned them when he could have kept them forever. He was a good man, a man of honor, and my family will remember him always. The diary itself now resides in a peace museum in Osaka, displayed alongside its English translation. Thousands of visitors each year read Hiroshi Yamamoto's words, his love for his family, his doubts about war, his final sunrise. And beside the diary is a photograph, Michael Chen and Keiko Yamamoto, meeting for the first time in 2002. Both elderly, both crying, both finally finding peace. The caption reads, 2 families, separated by war, united by words. May we learn from their story. May we choose peace. Because some journeys take 60 years. Some wounds take a lifetime to heal. Some words carry weight that can crush a soul or set it free. And sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do isn't killing his enemy. It's recognizing their humanity, honoring their words, and spending a lifetime trying to make amends for a war neither side truly wanted. That's the story of Michael Chen and Hiroshi Yamamoto, of a diary found in a jungle and returned 60 years later, of guilt and redemption, of enemies who were never really enemies at all, just men who wanted to go home. And in the end, Michael did help Hiroshi go home, not his body, which remained in Guadalcanal, buried with thousands of others in the jungle that had killed so many, but his words, his soul, his final gift to his family. After 60 years, Hiroshi Yamamoto's words finally came home.